Welcome to the monthly Truck Stop webinar. The Truck Stops are presented the second Thursday of each month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. These webinars are open to members of the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation. These webinars are presented as industry updates for information purposes only and do not qualify for state CE credit. If you're seeking state CE credit, please visit our website because we do provide 12 hours of state CE qualified webinars every month if you want to take a part of that. If you have questions, please type them in the chat window. They will be answered as time allows or responded to after the webinar via email. If you experience any audio problems, please send us a note in our chat window or call our office at 800-741-484. We will attempt to correct any problems as soon as possible. I want to talk about the session here today, the time we have here, how the insured can help claims handling by taking an empathetic approach to the claim. I was privileged to be at the annual conference of transportation attorneys in Chicago last in October of 2019, and I heard a session that was presented by our panelist today, or our person today with a panel, about how she, as a representative of a large motor carrier, helps handle claims by being involved in it earlier and show to the claimants and to the people about their concerns about them. So the sessions on the idea helped us how to reduce that claims cost. So today we have with us Cedar Abadi, who's Associate General Counsel Litigation for the DART Network. That's a large transportation company. She's Associated General Counsel in charge of the statistics of the DART transportation companies and the DART Network, following production liability defense work with firms in Cleveland, Denver, Minneapolis, and several years in a solo practice. She joined DART in 2014. Today, she oversees all serious disputes and matters in litigation across the country, motor carrier claims related, employment, real estate contracts, and for many enterprises and several motor carriers within the DART. That's the bio she sent us. I'm going to turn it over to her now, and she can tell you a little more about her activities and give some examples here, because most of this program is going to be her telling us what she has done in the past and how she has affected the cost of the claim, or at least protected her company she works with, who would be our insureds in this process. Welcome, and I'm sorry I butchered your name and other things, and you can straighten all that stuff out. But tell us a little more about it other than your bio, and I really appreciate you being up there in cold Minnesota talking to us today.
Thank you, Tommy. I appreciate it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with your insurance professionals about how they can help the carriers they work with feel empowered to go out and attempt an empathetic approach in some of the more catastrophic accidents that we face. I think it can do a great service for our industry, in addition to keeping the claims costs down for individual carriers within that industry. This is one of those things I firmly believe that when we all do better, we all do better. So I'm happy to be able to share my experience, and to the extent anyone who may be receiving this program or the carriers they service has questions about how to approach a particular issue, I'm very passionate about this topic, and I'd love to talk more about it offline.
Well, one of the things I've got out of the meeting you had was your passion here. This is what turned me on this, and we will furnish to everybody the information. I really appreciate you being able to do that. As we talked earlier, we'll try to build this into something, an annual conference, and do this, revisit again later with some more detail. But thank you for offering to reach out to these people. Absolutely,
absolutely. So, I mean, the first question is, what is the empathetic approach? The term empathy is the broad term, kind of eye of the beholder even. But what I've experienced and what I've seen be successful is truly internalizing that for the individual, which means for you guys on this webinar, helping your motor carrier select and identify the right person within that motor carrier who's going to be able to show up with that spirit of empathy, truly motivated by an empathetic impulse, because that authenticity is really the only way to not only feel confident in what you're doing, but also to have any real shot at success. Because as we know, in America today, folks are cynical. They're going to be, and they're in a crisis. The people you're going to be talking to, or that carrier representative is going to be talking to, are people who are having potentially the worst day they have ever had. And if you show up with any sort of what can come across as profiteering, or, you know, if your primary motivation is to save money, that's going to come across. So you need to be able to help your carriers identify whether and who in that carrier go and show up truly motivated by a spirit of how can I be of service for these individuals who are having a tough time today, and without truly being invested in the result. Like I truly believe that in this process, we are responsible for our efforts, but we cannot be responsible for the results. So many factors are beyond our control, right? After you leave, they're going to talk to other people and wherever those influences may lead them is completely outside of your control. But you'll know you have done the best you can do at the earliest opportunity you can, and you just have to trust that the right result will come. And I have been very pleased, and I want to knock on all available wood in my office right now, but I've been very pleased with the results that we at DART have obtained and have experienced, I guess, using this approach. It takes time to come to fruition, so you have to be patient with it. But DART didn't always do this. They didn't go out to scenes of accidents. They didn't try and meet with families after, you know, sometimes fatalities or really significant accidents, out of fear, you know, fear that it would go wrong, fear that the family would lash out, fear that in some way you'd make a bad situation even worse. And what I've strongly advocated for, and DART has, thankfully, you know, we're a family-owned company, and I appeal to the fact that these are families we're going to go talk to. We've set aside the fear and gone out with a spirit of service, and we have universally been received warmly.
That's such a great thing, because I get tired of all these lawyers' advertisement about how bad the industry is, how bad the insurance companies just trying to cut the price off. So if we can overcome that image there to say we are going to take responsibility and we're here to do what's right. And I think that's what you're talking about, and preach this
Exactly.
out that we're in your corner. I'll give you one example. You might want to appreciate this. I was talking to Rob Mosley the other day, and he said he settled a claim, and the plaintiff, not the plaintiff's attorney, said that he accepted what he offered because he looked up Rob's bio and found out how good he was and how he trusted him. So he got Rob saying it was a fair thing. So this is kind of stuff you're talking about now. Your reputation goes in, and therefore
Yes.
we're there to address the problem and make. I'm not going to use the word ever accept responsibility, but at least work through it and take the other party's considerations in. I really appreciate that approach. I think we hear too much of this how the insurance industry beats people up.
Right. And
you also
tries to obscure or avoid the question of like responsibility. And the fact is, even in an accident where we are not at fault, and I should say actually, so DART has a substantial self-insured retention, and then we have a sharing over that. So a lot of most of the money on the table is DART's money. So if I had to work, sometimes an insurer might have some reluctance about sending a person from DART out to the scene of a catastrophic accident. But fortunately, in our case, we are sort of empowered to do what we need to do. In the case of your insurance folks on this webinar, and then the carriers they work with, they'll want to make sure that they're hand in hand and they agree on the approach, and that they agree to move forward as devoid from fear as possible. These approaches are, I will say, easier when you know the carrier is not at fault, and we still do it in cases where we know we're not at fault, because that's still a very terrible day, and we all know that just because you're not at fault doesn't mean you're not going to get sued in the wrong case with the wrong people involved, right? So we do an empathetic approach based on the nature of the injury, not necessarily the nature of our fault, because it's too early to really be talking about fault anyways. But in any case, you can go and express a sincere sadness that they are experiencing what they're experiencing, regardless of whose fault it is. And people accept that a lot more easily than I think we in this industry believe that they will. They really just want to be seen and heard and know that you as the motor carrier think that what they're going through is important. And once they know that, they don't ever forget that. So they don't feel that they have to prove it to you with aggressive litigation techniques. It doesn't mean you don't wind up in litigation. And that's an anecdote I'd like to share. One of the early times that I did this approach. This is, I think, an instructive example. We had it's settled now, so I can talk a bit about it. We had a driver illegally parked on the side of the interstate in the Atlanta area. So these are all bad facts already. And our driver was not a driver that the DART network would have preferred to have with us. She had just joined us, and we had yet to uncover some things about her background. She also had an unauthorized passenger in the tractor, her 6-year-old, and it was not a good day for the DART network that day. A man exiting the interstate struck the back of the parked trailer and died instantly and catastrophically. They had to crane lift our trailer up off in order to be able to extract his SUV, which was embedded beneath the trailer. So now we have a fatality, and it's in Georgia. And anybody who's been doing this any amount of time starts to see those numbers spiral up like the national debt clock in New York Times, or the Times Square. So I went down. It was hard to identify a next of kin, but I just went down. I went down within a couple days of the accident because I knew whatever was going to happen, it was going to be important to be there. I ended up cold calling a number that we found via a background check, and I had no idea who was going to be on the other end. I thought I was going to be maybe reaching a brother of this man who was in his 50s. Instead, I reached his son, who had come into town from where he lives in Canada, which is why we couldn't find him. And he got on the phone. And so, you don't know how that call is going to go. He has not yet even buried his father. Fortunately, he was interested in talking about how DART could help be a part of the solution to the problems, the immediate challenges he was facing. So people in this position, usually this is the only bad accident, God willing, that their family has ever been involved in. They don't know the things that they're supposed to do, but we as motor carriers who, unfortunately, law large numbers, millions of miles traveled, we are involved in them more routinely. I shouldn't say routinely. More
too often. It's a better word.
So we know some of the lay of the land. We know some things that you're going to need to do, and we can help put you in. This was my pitch. We know some of the things that you may need to do. I can help you find the resources you need to answer the questions that you have. He didn't know, for example, how to get an estate started, how to be able to reclaim some of his dad's possessions out of that SUV that had been impounded, how to get the insurance company to pay attention. And their own auto insurance company, to get them to pay attention to the son as, an heir. So I was able to identify a counsel nearby that could help him set up an estate so that he could get those questions answered. And I put him in touch. I drove with him there. I sat down and I said, DART would like to go ahead and pick up, the tab for setting up this estate. We want to make this as easy as it can be, and it's less stressful. It's one thing that we can take off your plate. There's so many more things that we can't touch. We can't touch the emotions, not really, or shouldn't try. But we can touch the details, and we can alleviate a bit of the burden that these people are facing. And that's I candidly express that to these families when I meet with them. That is my goal. Whatever, no great, never too great or too small.
Let me ask you a question. Would you have taken the same approach even though you were not at fault?
I may not have written a blank check at the attorney's office like that.
Okay, but you would still try to work through things to diffuse some of the emotion.
Absolutely. I still would have brought him to that attorney's office. I still would have helped him find that attorney, for sure.
Tell them what they need in that. That's what I'm saying. I realize there's a difference there. So and a little. I've always thought a little money spent now will save money later. And this is not the time to chinch on that part of it here, because to stay that might cost $1,000. That's pennies compared to what the first 3 hours of a lawyer you're going to hire to defend you later, whether you're at fault or not.
Absolutely. To avoid or minimize a wrongful death case, like, yes, a penny spent. I don't have the right cliches for it, but okay. Yes, 100%. So we sat down, we got that started. The son and I stayed in touch. I think we shared pie together that day. It was remarkable. It was a remarkable day for me. I felt very honored to be able to be there and be of help. He was very grateful for the help because it was just something I was familiar with that he wasn't, and he felt relief that someone was paying attention. So I came back to Minnesota feeling really good about it. So imagine my surprise when that firm apparently found plaintiffs, aspirational plaintiff's attorney within their ranks, and I got a preservation notice and a notice to inspect our vehicle, and we ended up getting sued in that case. So now I can't talk to the son anymore, of course, because he's represented, and I have people on my end saying, well, was it even really worth it? Like, what just happened? Seems like your good deed went. And I was like, I don't think so. I think that the groundwork was laid, and sure enough, we went down and we settled that case so early, and for what my Georgia counsel said was a preposterously low amount for a death in Georgia. And at the end of it, the son hugged me and he said, I wish we hadn't had to do this. And I said, I know, I do too. But of course, I mean, an attorney got a hold of him and said, you know, there's money on the table here. You should probably pursue it. I mean, we worked illegally. It is what it is. But I know that the value of that claim was greatly influenced by the work I did in those first couple days with the son, letting him know that DART as a company was genuinely concerned about him being able to move through this process confidently and with, you know, the greatest degree of peace possible.
He was a person, and you, instead of just an animated somebody to fight or all that, and you were a person. That's the big part here. And as long
Exactly.
as we reduce a lot of conflict when we have a person-to-person relationship. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that part of it. And I know it made you, as you said, feel good because you felt you helped somebody. And that's all. That's what we're talking about here.
Right, right. We have resources. We as motor carriers have these sorts of resources available to us. And there's no reason to, I don't know, to let folks struggle with them when it's really to our best interest. Like getting an estate set up in that case is to our benefit as well, frankly. And there are a lot of things. Another benefit that comes out of making these empathetic approaches is, well, any carrier on this call who's had a bad accident knows that you sit in that office and you worry and you fret with the other people in your office, in your operations, in your safety department about how it could go bad, what it's going to look like, what do you put on reserves for this, all of those things, and they're usually very informed by fear because you don't have any other information. But when you go out and actually meet with the families and hear from them and learn about their condition and you open up those lines of communication, you're no longer stuck in that place where you're devoting a lot of time, like person hours and resources, to worrying about a case. You have more information because you've made yourself accessible.
You're made a person. Yes, that's a great example. You have a few others here you want to share?
Sure, I do. Let's see. I don't know if you're going to be able to do this, but and this is a case that's still ongoing, but we had a terrible collision just this last fall, 60 miles away from our headquarters here in Minnesota. It was in a rural road in Wisconsin, and two 16-year-olds who were on an in-service day from school ran a stop sign and T-boned one of our tractor trailers, and neither one survived. These young people were really, really good young people. They were just sweet, National Honor Society, volleyball champs, just wonderful kids from a really close-knit small community in Wisconsin. And that accident happened in the afternoon on a Monday, and on Tuesday morning, I drove to that town and I just showed up at the high school. Because I knew in a small town, about 4,000 people, I'm from a town like that, and I knew that, you lose one kid in a town that small, and it's devastating for the entire community. And to lose two, I knew that school would be in a state of mourning. And I wanted to, and just
your description of that, you were not at fault at this time, or at least you weren't at fault before. Would be a question to that part, but you just went there anyway.
No,
okay,
not at fault. But you have parents who just buried their 16-year-olds, and there's a passenger in that vehicle. You know what I mean? It's not that there's no exposure per se. It's not no claims professional would want to put reserves on it, even if it's just defense reserves. So there is just being not at fault, as we all know, doesn't mean you're not looking at something costly. But I really went out because I just couldn't imagine. I mean, I have a teenager, and every day when they leave, of course, it's approaching it just as a human being, right? And I went out there and I didn't know what that was going to look like. I didn't know if they would let me in. What is it? Can you go to a high school if you don't have a child? Enroll there and just walk in? I didn't know in 2019. But they did let me in, and I sat and I prayed with the clergy that were there that day that had come from all these neighboring communities. The volleyball team was in deep mourning, and they were going to have a dinner that night. And they gave me a little list of the things I could pick up at the grocery store to help that dinner go successfully. And I did that, and they sent me a thank you note. And over Christmas, I received 2 letters from the family members of the passenger, the young girl. She was going to go get her driver's license the next day before that day that she died in that accident. And it was about, thank you for keeping Grace in your heart. And they sent me a little necklace that has her name on it and a coffee gift card, because they said that was one of Grace's favorite things. And I can't tell you how moved I was and how moved the people in this building were. Because another thing that happens is that we in our industry, we think that they think such terrible things about us as a trucking company, but we also assume the worst of them most of the time, right? We assume that they're going to get a hold of some nasty lawyer and really make things terrible for us. But sometimes it's just good people that are really sad, but are glad to see that you are also sad. And that's what happened here. So it's been incredibly moving for us. Plus, this is another case where we would be sitting in fear had that connection not been established.
That's an example of both sides of this, but the point of it made you feel good. I'm sure when you do this, how do you go back and talk about, I'm thinking about in this case, the driver that was involved in this obviously has an emotional effort too. Do you share these outcomes with them or get them involved in it here to let them to be a part of the process or the results? Because I know it's traumatic for them too. We are. The other thing you mentioned, I got 4 teenage granddaughters driving now between the age of 16 and 22. So I can totally relate to what you're talking about in those areas here. And I see it was emotionally impact on you, but it relieves for the whole company. It relieves, did it not? Absolutely.
In terms of the involving the drivers, I never require that a driver be involved. Often, as you mentioned, they're going to be going through their own system with it, their own process. I will say those families in Wisconsin asked about our driver. The people at the school, the clergy, the teachers at the high school asked, how is your driver doing? Is he doing okay? Can you tell us his first name? We'd like to pray for him. It was remarkable. Again, that's not something that anyone in our building would have assumed people there would be thinking about. But knowing that did happen helps us reconnect with the humanity of this world, really, which is priceless. So I do fill in our drivers about the conversations that I have with these families. I don't, especially if I believe that litigation is likely, I'm going to limit some of that because, of course, you have some privileged stuff, and I don't want them to feel like they need to repeat things like that. But I will often wind up in the position of being a conduit of information. So if a driver wants to express to the family how sad he was about it, it will wind up flowing through me. But at the very least, they each know that the other is thinking about them, which, again, the more you can do to diffuse the anger and the mistrust and the, righteous indignation that can spark up on both sides, the more likely you're going to be able to sit down and resolve that claim for a reasonable amount of money later. The other thing about this empathetic approach is that, so when I inherited this job, we hadn't been doing it, as I said. So I had a number of cases that were set to either, nearing trial or nearing a resolution point. And no one had ever talked with the families or addressed them and their fears to that point. It's never too late. Sitting down at that mediation table, now mediators are sometimes reluctant to let you actually talk face to face with the families. But if you make sure that you let them know that all you're there to do is acknowledge the responsibility that's on your side of the table, and to express your remorse that they had to experience what they had to experience. Not that you caused stuff, but you went through a tough time, and I want to acknowledge that, and I want to say that I'm here today to try and move forward and turn this, let's get to a solution. It helps. Every bit of showing up with empathy helps resolve claims in a more reasonable fashion. If you can diffuse the anger in the other room at whatever point and however often you can, it will be to the benefit of the carrier.
When we talk about this as far as mediation goes, and I don't really have it here in the outline, but we talk about mediation, we try to explain what that process is. And I'm like you, I think that's a chance for both sides to see each other, not only the public seeing the people damaged, seeing that the person who caused the damage is a real human being and has emotion too, but it also, in our senses, it also shows our insureds what goes through and what the other side has. So when we resolve it, we get less questions about why did you pay that much, because now they understand the process. That, in fact, we've done a webinar similar to this, a truck stop a couple of years ago with a friend of mine in Orlando who's a mediator who we go back a long ways, and he even suggested to voluntarily mediate early if you can, just to get all the facts on the table and start showing this as early as possible. As you know, most of the times the courts require it once it gets in the court systems itself.
Sure.
But a lot of times the plaintiff's attorneys will agree to early to get all the facts out and and know where we damage here. But that's a great a thought process. So if you can't visit the site itself, at least have at the mediation have this kind of stuff shown and show up whenever possible.
Absolutely. So I wanted to go back. I realized that one of the key things that we should try to do today is come up with positive takeaways, to-dos that the folks attending the webinar can take in their conversations to their carriers to help them get on the path of figuring out which are the right cases to reach out like this on, who to send, those sorts of things.
I've got a slide here. I was going to ask you first about it, if you don't mind. Tell me about, I preach reporting the claims immediately, and this is exactly where you're going to now. And I'm sure you have that in your system, every claim there. And then once you get it, then we talk about, and this is what I have on the slide you just said, when do you get involved there? Tell me how you make sure everybody reports them immediately, then how it filters down to you, and then when do you, I know you're involved as a lawyer, but when you're involved in the system. So this is the question I had a slide that led to the question you just had.
Sure, gotcha. Okay, so great. So our drivers, of course, are required to report all accidents immediately. Sometimes there's a delay for various reasons. Sometimes we had a terrible accident, fatality, across the river from us, so within 5 miles, fatality and a degloving injury of a couple on a motorcycle. And our driver, we heard about it on the news first.
Ooh.
Our driver's phone had been confiscated by the police at the scene, so he wasn't able to call it in, but we saw a news report, and literally someone recognized the motorcycle that was underneath our trailer on the news and said, I think I know those people. So completely, that was the case where we reached out as well, and we could talk about that if we have time. But in any case, so if there is a serious DOT recordable, and at that point, sometimes you don't know how injured people are, so I don't make a triage list of like, I only want to hear about it if someone is, dead or whatever. I say if it's a DOT recordable, I want to know about it immediately, because then I will look at those DOT recordables and say, okay, given what we believe our fault situation looks like, given the extent of the injuries that we think we know about at this time, is this a telephone call? Is this an in-person? Do we send an independent adjuster to the scene to try and make that connection, or do I need to go? And I make that decision for every serious accident. It is a gut call, and you don't make it just once either. So you might hear about the accident, you hear about some facts immediately, and then you learn more as the night goes on, or the next day. You may revisit that decision and change your mind. I've also found, frankly, that sending a company representative immediately can be too fast. I think that families don't necessarily want to deal with another person that's not part of their clan. You know what I mean? If they're dealing with a catastrophic loss in their family, you're more work for them on that initial time period. You need to wait until the dust settles a little before, and they've started to list out what problems they have that you can help them solve. So you don't really want to go in too soon. So you can watch it develop a bit and then determine whether this is the kind of case that requires, that suggests the utility of an in-person visit.
I hope everybody listening here knows what a deal reportable crash is, but for you did not. It's when there was a fatality and or an injury that had to be treated at a hospital away from the crash site. Also towed. I'm sure if it was towed only, you'd have a different approach. But the first two would be the ones you react to, where there's a fatality or an injury that had to be treated away. That would be where you would have a response to that. So just to let everybody know we're on the same page. Sometimes we use terminology. Right.
Sorry.
Not everybody. No, you don't be sorry, but I'm hoping we preach that in everything we do. So I hope everybody listening to that knows that
right.
without involved it. So it's a gut feeling that, and then I know that we deal this, and besides reporting it, we have, and I heard you talk about it, and you alluded to it here in the process in Chicago. You balance, you got an insurance company's claims person, you got the defense attorneys, you got the plaintiffs attorneys, and you got insured parties, and you have to balance all that in, because once there's a case in court, then the plaintiffs attorneys prohibit some stuff. Sometimes the defense attorneys don't want you to be involved in it because they're afraid of who you are. Here, you got to deal, and you being self-insured, it's a whole different world. I, at one time, ran a program where I had a very large retention, and my comment with insurance company is, you can pay or I can be involved. That's your choice, but I think you're going to have to explain to me why you're involved, so it's better off if I get involved early so you don't have to explain it later. And so I think that's your attitude too, but as you said, I didn't have as much involved in as you did, the millions, but I had some of that large part of it. But how do you balance all those things as we deal with it? And remember, we're talking about smaller motor carriers. Unfortunately, they don't have a you involved in that. A lot of times the retail agent has to help them walk through some of this process, give them some advice. And I'm hoping, as we're going to end up the last slide, to encourage retail agents, to encourage the insured, at least tack this approach to things, and whether it's upfront like you're doing it now, or at mediation, or some other way of doing it. But tell me, I know you talked a little bit, but how do you walk through all this, that part of it? How does it go in your mind?
Sure. So part of this, in the context that you're talking about, for the people on this webinar, some of this is going to have to be done before the accident. That claim, your insurance company rep is going to need to have some familiarity with who that motor carrier would send in the right case. Otherwise, there's going to be too much fear there. You don't want to be making these decisions when there's information streaming in about the accident, within that first 24 hours. Ideally, the insurance company and the motor carrier will have agreed in advance, in the right kind of case, we would try this empathetic approach, and here's who we would send. So, and then it would be agreed between everyone. So I say that because we just last week had a local motor carrier here in Minnesota. I won't name their name, but they're a smaller carrier, and they had a terrible accident in a bordering state and really wanted to go down and do this empathetic approach. But they had a $15,000 deductible, and they called their insurer, and their insurer said, no, you can't. I mean, it's their call. But they didn't have enough familiarity with the guy who was saying, I want to go down and do this. And so they had some basis for mistrusting the process. I hope that changes industry-wide, but until it does, you have to be the change you want to see in the world. So work together with your motor carrier, for these insurance professionals that are on this webinar. Work with them and say, who do you think, if you wanted to try something like this, first of all, do you want to try it? Do you think that this could have utility? Here's what I think. Here's what I've heard. Why don't you talk to some other motor carriers? For example, Cedar from Dart would love to talk to you. And who would you send, do you think, if there was, for example, a death case? Who would you want to send? And your insurance professional can help the carrier decide based on their exposure to those folks. I have advocated, for example, my boss here asked, who would you send if you couldn't go? And I said, honestly, you and your wife.
The wife being diffusing, make it personal.
Kind of, yeah. So, be willing to think outside of the box. The most effective way, the most effective thing that I have seen, like when people's faces soften to me, is when I say, I'm here on behalf of families to connect with your family. This is family to family stuff. So whoever's going to be able to do that best, and frankly, I think showing up with a spouse would be an amazing gesture, especially for these smaller carriers that may just have a few trucks, family owned. I mean, you couldn't argue with that carrier's family's commitment to making that connection. It would be indisputable. So I think it could be very powerful. In any case, so insurance company, work with the carrier to figure out who would go, so you already have that in your back pocket. Then
let me point out what the insurance carrier is worried about is you don't want somebody, well, I'm at fault, I'm sorry, this kind of stuff. You got to watch the language. So that's what the insurance carrier is worried about, somebody going overboard in this without showing this other part. So that would be a script, and we could talk about that, but just let everybody know what we're hearing. That's what they're worried about. Once you get through that and know the person there actually has this theory involved, but we're not going to talk about fault. We're not talking about claim. All we're there is to try to show a human being human to this part of it only. And then obviously the defense attorneys, you work with that. That would be after the case starts. So that would be, you get more involved. Now you have to answer the question to that. How often does the insured party, I'm sure you've had some, the two examples you gave showed a lot of acceptance. I'm sure you've had a lot of people who shut their door in your face, or maybe not as often as I would think, but a lot of times the other party doesn't accept this. Where do you deal with that part of it, or how often do you see that happening?
I've never had anyone turn me down in person.
Okay.
And I've always been accepted warmly. I've been brought into people's homes. I mean, it's been amazing. In terms of being rebuffed, like by phone, if I've tried to reach out by phone, sometimes I won't get a return call, and then I'll hear from an attorney, which is kind of like being rebuffed. But I've still seen it play out in a way that, like, the case doesn't escalate. It doesn't spiral out of control. Like I see so many other cases that don't have that attention. I had another parked on the side of the road case in Tennessee, and a man was very, very seriously injured. The police said they couldn't do the inventory of the vehicle because there was so much blood inside. And I went to their home, and I didn't expect he would be there. I thought he was supposed to still be in the hospital, but in fact, he answered the door. And I didn't show up empty-handed, but I mean, I'm in the middle of rural Tennessee. It could have gone a lot of different ways. Instead, I sat down and I wound up, visiting with him and his wife in prayer, actually. And then I got a letter from an attorney after that. But then they fired that attorney, and I haven't heard from anyone since. So, I was going to ask you that part. Sometimes the attorney allows you to do it. The plaintiff's attorney, sometimes they don't. It depends on who you're dealing with in that area. Right. What I see is that by even laying the ground, if you can show up with sincerity, it does lay a groundwork. It may not, again, I have had to learn a lot of patience, because the results, if you will, from this process take time to grow to fruition. But I see them growing differently than other cases that don't have this attention.
The last thing we part here, and the last thing we talked about it, and you started, give me again, you were going to give some suggestions to small limited carriers, and I just wanted those other two questions to get to that part. And that's what I want to take away here, if you don't mind spending the last few minutes here talking about how you would suggest for these retail agents who are insuring, you know the statistics, 85-90% of motor carriers have less than 10 power units, and that's the core writing of the audience. No matter who's in the insurance industry, that's the most insureds out there, so that's who we write the most of. So not everybody's going to have you involved in it, and a lot of times, as you know, the retail agent is a conduit to handle these things and to help the insured be better prepared. So give some thoughts to the retail agent in this process, if you don't mind, as we close this out.
Sure. Okay. Encourage your motor carriers to be self-critical in whether they have the capacity to do this well, but to be empowered and emboldened in the process as well. You know what I mean? Pick the right person or persons that can carry a message of service from that motor carrier to an individual and help, as you know, the insurance professional, the retail agent, help them work through that process. Be the impartial, the neutral party outside who can say, I know that you might want to send this guy, but I think this might be your better asset. He has a warmer affect. Whatever it is, be part of the solution for that carrier so that they can feel empowered when the time comes to go and do the work that needs to be done. And then make sure that you know that you and they are working hand in hand on it. Tell them that you're there to be, for example, if an individual from the carrier goes out to meet with a family and is worried, well, if I pay for this funeral, or if I want to donate substantially to this memorial fund, is that going to be some kind of admission, or is that going to be against my deductible? I don't know. Let them know that you are going to continue to work hand in hand with them on each and every one of those questions, even if they're novel, because they likely will be. I think if you can empower them to be a part of the change that we want to see that will benefit both the industry and that carrier, you'll be providing, I mean, it's a value add service over and above the actual financial support that the insurer is ultimately providing.
And you already mentioned also have the retail agent work with that insured and an insurance carrier and whoever the claims office insurance carrier to make sure the ground rules are set. And so we walk down that path and they kind of approve that part of it instead of just showing up to how to be careful. That would be something early on that you would have to work with on that part, would you not?
Exactly. If that retail agent can have had those conversations about here's the things that you want to avoid in those conversations with families, here's the things you would want to focus on, and the retail agent can then have a papered file and make sure that the insurer knows, so that when the time comes, it can be more of a seamless execution. Again, that will benefit everyone. You're right.
And maybe we don't do this, though, and we already mentioned it earlier, I was going to do it here again, is the mediation. You got some examples how you haven't been able to get early on, but in mediation, you're able to do some of the stuff that you could share with this to let them know, at least, because then the insurer does have an opportunity to be involved in mediation, whether they want to or not. I mean, there's an option to that part, but most of the time, the insured is given the opportunity to be there. Could you talk about the advantage of doing that and how to prepare the insured for that mediation process? Because a lot of times the defense attorney doesn't do a good job in those areas, unfortunately.
Yeah, sometimes the defense attorney can be almost another obstacle because they get into the lockstep of litigation, and we know we have to do this first. And really, again, if you've had early conversations with claimants or even touch points, or you even tried but failed to reach them early on, they're more likely to be willing to sit down and have a conversation with you at a mediation earlier on, which of course reduces your litigation spend. It also gives you an opportunity, of course, to resolve their claims and be able to close that file. So the accident that I mentioned, I think it's best explained via anecdote, as many things are. The accident I mentioned with the motorcyclist and who perished, and then his wife had a leg degloving injury. So these are very serious injuries. Our driver, it was a disputed liability claim, but we were never going to win. It was never going to be a 0 day for DART. And it's people local and it's close by. And because of the nature of the injuries and because of how quickly they were represented, I was unable to connect with the family immediately. But because I had cultivated relationships with the counsel, so you hear from the counsel, don't shut down, keep talking. And sometimes you have to talk through defense counsel, but not always. If you're not yet represented, if you've just gotten a letter of representation, you can set some groundwork with that plaintiff's attorney as well, because you know that plaintiff's attorney is in the ear of their client. Let them know that you're there, that you want to be helpful. Is there anything your clients need in the short term that I could provide, with no expectation, just because, families caring about families, and I had to ask.
No releases and things like that. You're just here to help, right?
Absolutely. I do it through, it's a little more awkward when you're doing it through a plaintiff's attorney, but you can still do it. So I had cultivated that kind of relationship with the people who were representing this family. This accident happened in July. Well, Christmas comes, and this woman has buried her husband and is recovering from a very serious accident and was unable to work. So it occurred to us, this might be a tricky Christmas for her. So I picked up the phone and I called her attorney and I said, do you have any objection with us sending your client a check just to help with Christmas? No expectation. It's not like a prepayment. It's just whatever. And, he said, absolutely. I think she'd really appreciate that. So I went and found a card, which, by the way, is Hallmark does not make a card for this.
Yes.
They do not. And Christmas is tricky because it's all about joy and love and the spirit of the season. And but I found a card. It had a hummingbird on it and it was plain on the inside. I promise this is important. Tucked the check in. I just said, the families of DART transit company continue to hold your family in our thoughts and prayers. Simple. Mediation was maybe 9 months thereafter. At the end, we settled the claim for a remarkably reasonable amount. I went in to say thank you at the end, to say our goodbyes. And she said, they didn't let us meet with her in advance, which was unfortunate. But I sat with her after, and she said, oh, you sent the card. And she opened it. She opened this folder she had in front of her, and she had brought a full color photograph or a photocopy of the card that I had sent, and said, you wouldn't know this, but a hummingbird is like my spirit animal. And she pulled up her sleeve and showed me a hummingbird tattoo on her arm and said, I opened that card and I began weeping because before I even saw the check inside, because I knew that everything was going to be okay. And your card meant so much to me. I'm so happy to meet you. And she cried and she hugged me and I cried. So you don't know how these results are going to play out, but there are opportunities all the time for employing empathy in the effort of resolving claims, both to be good people and to resolve our claims in a more reasonable way. It works.
And the part of the resolved claims is we owe what we owe. Damage is done. People's lives are worth something. The medical bills are done. We're not going to avoid any of that stuff. We're avoiding all this lottery theory out of this thing by dealing with two humans. Is that what you would end up saying, the bottom line to this part of it? And the more humanistic you can make it and more one-on-one persons, the easier it is to get to the conclusion we only pay for the damages we have done, not these catastrophic reptile theories kind of situations that we deal with every day. Because I don't have to tell you the cost of insurance is going up. I'm sure that you're facing this, and we got to do all we can to do this, and this is a real big part of it here.
Right. Anything
in closing?
I think that's it. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And like I said, my phone is always on. I'd love to speak with anyone who had any questions about it.
We'll email everybody who's going to be attended this, your email address and your bio and things like that. And we really appreciate your thing. And if I'm going to call on you to do this again or to do it in another format, if you don't mind this, because I thought I got a lot out of this in what you did in Chicago, so you could see where I listened at least. I'm not sure everybody in the audience did, but because I have the same thoughts about handling things as you do. Just want to remind everybody that these truck stops are bought the second Thursday of each month. And if you want more information, the MCIEF offering this to the memberships and designation list stuff, please take in contact with us. And with that said, we're done. Thank you. By the way, thank you, Cedar. I really, really appreciate this. You're
welcome.